Have you ever wondered why sometimes your art just looks off? You've worked really hard on it, but there's something not quite right about it, and you can't quite put your finger on it. Well, my name is Ken. I'm a professional concept artist and illustrator, and today I'm going to help you diagnose some problems about why your art may look off. So I've been taking submissions from subscribers of the channel on the Discord server, and we're going to be taking a look at some of these submissions today. And we're going to work through what I would do to fix these, and hopefully, we all learn something along the way. So without further ado, let's start with the first one. So we're going to start with the first one from user Wildest of the West. Now, first of all, I really like your image. I really like the colors you're choosing with the warm highlights and sort of like just this warm light coupled with the sort of like purple shadows. I think it's a really cool color combination. I also really like your sense of perspective. It's a top-down shot, so you have these vertical lines that are converging to a third vanishing point somewhere below the screen, and it gives a nice sense of height and depth, which I think is really good. So the first thing I noticed, and this is something that I've noticed pop up again and again with so many of these submissions, is the lack of a cast shadow. So here's what I did. All I did was painted in some cast shadows, and immediately after just adding this cast shadow in, really loosely if I might add, you get a stronger sense of where the light is coming from. You have this like light that's probably coming from somewhere on the left here, and so I just want to exaggerate that a little bit more and just reinforce that lighting. And so I have these cast shadows that just go through the entire city. The thing about light is that, well, if you have something in the way, it's going to cast a shadow. That's just, something that we all kind of know instinctively. But when it comes to making art, it's something that you have to be really conscious of. So the next thing I did was just break up the shapes. I noticed that a lot of your buildings are kind of just cubes or boxes, so it's just all squarish. What I did was just break up some of these silhouettes. So here, I cut a slant here. Here I just extruded and added a little bit more stuff here and an extension up here. But just think about how these buildings are, not all square, basically boxes. I kind of like what you have here with this sort of like a slanted shape here, and I would like to see more of that in your building designs. All right, next up, I added a little bit of highlights to some of the buildings just to catch the light a little bit more and just bring up that contrast. I just added like a little halftone pattern just to make it look like sort of like a Spider-Verse look, because I think your art is really stylized and I think you could lean into that a bit more. It's not entirely accurate here, these highlights, but it's something that I want you to maybe think about. Just trying to make sure that the materials read properly, because glass is going to be more reflective than whatever metal and steel the rest of the buildings are made of. So just try to reflect that a little bit more. After that, I just added a little bit more tiny details to like the top of the roofs, and just making sure just something to add in like antennas and water towers and all sorts of stuff. You could add a helipad onto the top of the roofs, maybe add some lampposts and power lines and power cables throughout your streets, and just look at like real skyscrapers and see what they have on top of their roofs and try to add that in, because your shot is just it's just looking down on these buildings. So you don't want the top of them to be, well, just plain and empty. You want to add some detail just so that your buildings and your city just feels more alive. And lastly, I just put some stank on it. A little bit of a glow here, a bloom, just to sell that light a little bit more. And then a little bit of shadow and vignetting here, just so I can, bring that focus to where I want it to be, which is somewhere on the, left side of the image. So there you have it. That's the after. That's what I would do to it. Here's another look at the before image, and here's the look at the after image. Yep, that's it. All right, cool. Let's move on to the next one. All right, so this is from Rufen, and they've come to me with a very specific request, and that is how to make the grass look greener. They're having trouble with making the grass look green and really pop. I like that. I like that there's a specific thing that they need help with, and we're gonna try our best to do that. Now, first of all, I don't necessarily know if the grass being greener is a better thing, but we're gonna honor that request anyways, because I do like the colors that you have here. I like the warm sort of like tones that you have in here. Coupled with like sort of like this cool shadow that you have somewhere around this middle. I think it works really well with the red skin of your character. But again, we're gonna try to honor that request, and I'm gonna see what I can do to make the grass look greener. So the first thing I did was kind of the most obvious thing, the first thing you would think of, which is to boost the saturation of the green here. Now the way I did that was kind of interesting because of the way chroma works. Now green is the most saturated or has the highest chroma, not when it's all the way at its brightest. It's somewhere in the middle where it's sort of like a middle green where that is the most saturated green that you can get. So what I did was actually just bring the brightness or value of your green down in order to just get the most out of that color. You know, just gonna juice that lemon real hard. You're gonna make sure that you gotta bring that value down. So something like a yellow would have a higher chroma and would look more saturated if it was at a higher value versus like something where it's like a lower value, in which case it's just basically brown, right? So green just sits somewhere in the middle. So that's what I did. I just sort of brought that down and boosted the saturation with like a saturation adjustment layer. And the next thing I did was also make the edges of the image less saturated. Now, the way to make something look saturated or the way to get someone's attention is by contrast. So you can't have everything saturated. If you want your viewer to look and pay attention to how lush and green the center of this image is, this patch of grass, well, you're gonna have to push all the rest of this towards something that's a little bit more gray and desaturated. All right, next up, I added a little bit of light and a little bit of shadow just to push this green here a little bit more. So what I'm seeing is that there's just this nice patch of sunlight that's landing just nicely on this clearing along the edge of a forest. So what I did was just to boost this lighting here, add like a little bit of a light ray, you see on the top right, to just show that there's a little bit more sunlight coming around the top right of the image, and also just darkening up the rest of the edges just to make sure that light is really, really pronounced. So what I did was paint in this bounce light from the grass below. So this is what happens when bright sunlight hits the patch of green grass and then gets bounced back up onto the character. So it bounces off onto the bottom of the chin here, the bottom of the hair, the bottom of the arm. So any part of the body that is facing the ground is gonna get some green light on it. You're gonna see this in lots of photographs of sports events where athletes are playing in bright daylight on a green field, and you're gonna see a lot of that green light from the grass get reflected back up onto them. Another thing that I've noticed is, again, a lack of cast shadows is something that I've seen pop up time and time again. If characters going to be sitting in this bright sunlight, they're going to be casting quite a harsh shadow. So I've just added some shadow here to where they're sitting on this ledge here, and even the back of this ear, right? The ear where it's going to cast some shadow onto the back of the head. You're going to get some shadow there because of the direction of the light and where it's coming from. I think I'm being quite heavy-handed with this just to show you what I'm talking about. You can always take this and just dial it back a little bit and just massage it to a point where it's, it feels more comfortable for you. All right, next up, this one, I don't know how I feel about this too much. I think it's just a different direction. But what I did was lighten the face area of this character and just darken the background just so they pop out from the background a little bit more, and it's just more of the focal area. I do like this one where it's sort of in shadow and the brightest part of the painting is behind them, but again, I think it's just a different approach. What I did was just to darken this area with a multiply layer at the back here, lighten this just to make this grass again just feel a little bit more green and help this character blend into that area a bit more, versus being this where it's kind of just like a little bit too dark for my liking. I think this grass here, while it does look really, really green, shouldn't be the main focal point of the image. I think your painting should be more focused on the character. So it just makes more sense to add that contrast to the character. And now I'm really, really paying attention to this, and that silhouette really, really pops out from the background. So next thing I did was just warm it up a little bit. I really like your original direction, the original colors that you have, which were slightly on the warmer side. So I just wanted to bring that back into the painting. And yep, that's pretty much it for this one. I just want to say again, I really, really like your original image, Rufen. I think that there's a really specific style. You have a very strong sense of color that I think that you can continue to keep pushing. But if you're gonna try and talk about making this grass greener, this is how I would go about it. All right, moving on. This next one is by Lala, and man, I'm just so hesitant to give feedback on this one because Lara is such a specific style that, you know, any sort of feedback that I give or any changes I make would be a deviation from your personal style, which is a very, very singular style. It's very stylized, so a lot of the things that I say and a lot of these fundamental principles that I'm going to talk about don't necessarily apply to you, so take this with a very, very heavy grain of salt, okay? Looking at this, I really like the colors you're using. I love the rendering style. It's sort of like a crayon oil pastel look. And so the first thing I sort of just looked at was your image in black and white. I made your image black and white just to check the values and to see where everything is. And you can sort of see that the edge of this character, the hair, it sort of blends into the background and it's sort of losing her a little bit. Now, this isn't necessarily a bad thing. It's just that where your strongest points of contrast are sort of like at the edge of this image and not necessarily on her face, which is where, you know, we want to be looking at. So what I did was just to push this border around her, this halo around her a bit more, and really lean into this idea of this character being backlit by starlight. And just really run with that idea and push it to the extreme. Again, I think this is going a bit too far, but the general idea remains. So just building this up and making this background a little bit more brighter. I just added in a little bit more pink that you had in the original image just to balance it out here. And just adding a little bit of a darker tone to her hair, just to, again, break out that silhouette. Lastly, just because we're doing something that's a bit more stylized, it doesn't mean that we should forsake the fundamentals like anatomy and things like that. So I just fixed her sort of neck bone clavicle area here just to make sure that that anatomy looks correct, and also just a little bit of shadow, that cast shadow here on her neck. It's just kind of the wrong shape because the neck is never going to cast a shadow of that shape, and just adding that in here. Again, that helps pop her face out a little bit more. You can now see her chin. So that's what I would do to this image. It's not a lot, but I think just thinking about the idea of what you have, your initial story, and just running with that, just pushing that to the extreme and see how far you can push it before it breaks. And if it breaks, you can just dial it back. Awesome, really nice work, Lara. Moving on. All right, this next one is by Munch, and they've submitted this really beautiful image. First of all, I think this is really great, Munch. I think you're amazing at draftsmanship. I think your color sense is really good, and I just really love the way her hair is rendered, and as well as the rest of this. I like the idea of her. Sort of like what I gather is that she's, you know, made out of cosmic stuff. There's stars in her hair, and her shirt is sort of made out of this like cloud material, and I think you have a great eye for finishing an image. What I noticed is that there are a few fundamental mistakes. The big one is anatomy. Just something about the way her shoulders are positioned that just doesn't quite sit right with me. I think the main thing here is that her head sort of seems to be in the wrong position, where her neck is coming out from where her shoulders should be. So I think overall everything's really great, but at the heart of it is just anatomical mistakes, which is, you know, surprisingly easy to fix. So the first thing that I would do with something like this is to just draw it again and try to find out how to adjust things and fix things. So what I would do is just put a white layer above your image and set it at like 80-90% opacity, and then draw over that. So I just very loosely just sketch over your drawing with the ballpoint pen brush that's available for free on the Chroma MoMA Press website. To go check it out, it's in the link below. But I drew this very roughly to just figure out where my anatomy is at, right? I'm just drawing the body as a box, and the head I just traced over your drawing and just moved it to where I think is correct. And it's really important for poses like this where the characters sort of folded in upon themselves, and there's a lot of things that are being, covered by another thing. Your hand is covering your shoulder and the chest. So it's really important to just draw through everything, even though you're not going to see it in the final image, to just draw through where the chest is going to be, where the arm is going to be, and then the forearm where that overlaps. And so this is kind of my final drawing of where I think the pose looks correct. This might not be the pose that you want or the pose that you're going for, I know that your original pose, her shoulders are much more closed up. She's much more hunched and folded in on herself. But this is still the same approach that I would use, which is to just put a white layer over it and then draw over it. Just redraw everything and then move stuff around to see where, you know, things feel comfortable and then they look right. So after that, I kind of just Frankenstein your painting. I copy and pasted bits of it and just move stuff around and warp things around in order to match my drawing of the character. And that's sort of like the pose that I came up with. And after that, I just drew over it, again, very loosely, just to give you an idea of what I think the final should look like. And this whole white layer drawing on top of it technique is a great way to troubleshoot a painting, especially when you're halfway through and you don't really know what's wrong with it, you know, something's not quite right. I would just do that and just draw over it and figure it out before moving on to the final, because, you know, sometimes when you get to the final, it's too late and you've wasted too much time. You could have just saved yourself so much pain and effort if you just did that halfway through. So if you do end up revising this painting, I would really love to see you post it, all of you really, on the Discord server, because I want to see where this goes. I want to see how far you guys can push it and if, you know, you're making any improvements to it. Anyways, next one. All right, this last one is by user Envyfish. Now, what I like about this painting is that there is a clear focal point and there's a clear story. The focal point is the first one, you're looking at this deer centaur, and the next focal point is this golden temple up on the top right. And story behind it, I think, is pretty clear. Deer spirit and her two familiars are traveling up these stairs to reach this golden temple. So very clear story, very clear focal points. Let's see what we can do to push that along. So the first thing I did was to darken up these edges. I find these scratchings and a lot of these minor details are a little bit too noisy for me. They're pulling my eye away from the focal point, which is, you know, this character and the deer spirit and the temple. We've talked about this. So I just want to mute this. I think it's okay that you can keep some of them in there, but I just want to try and like mute it down as much as possible. It's really, really crucial that we keep in mind, you know, what's important about this image, and it's not, you know, whatever details you have on this shrine on the top left of your image. There's also an additional benefit of darkening it up, which is to help your characters pop out a little bit more. But these characters are sort of glowing light, so I just want to really make sure that they glow as much as possible. And now, because I've darkened it, that contrast is boosted way up, and now she looks so much brighter, right? And even this deer here, I've sort of like darkened the background behind these deers, and now they look a lot more, you know, bright and glowy. All right, next. I found that this temple being the focal point, it being too close to the corner, not enough headroom here, and, you know, just too close to the edges of the painting to be very uncomfortable. It feels sort of claustrophobic, and I'm left wanting to sort of like peek over the painting just to see more, and it feels, you know, not very nice. It feels like there's something pressing down on my head when I'm looking at something that's really, really close to the top of the frame. So what I did was just bring this down and just added more headroom here, just to give your painting a bit more space to breathe. There's a lot of really heavy detail in here, not a lot of blank spots for the eye to rest. So it's sort of like double whammy, where I brought this down closer to the center of the image, and the closer your focal point is to the center of the image, the more likely it is for someone to, you know, look at it, and also giving it some empty space to just relax and breathe. Another thing that I did was to take out this lens flare that you have on the top of this roof here. And I sort of get where you're coming from. You know, you want this bright light, and there's this whole glowing, you know, magical aura about this temple. And I'm going to show you how I bring that back later. But for now, I just took this out, and it just makes the silhouette read a lot better too. You have this nice, sharp, triangular silhouette of this temple roof, and I don't want to break that by adding this really harsh lens flare that just dulls that edge. Next, I added some rim light, just to catch the edges of the shrines and the Torii gate here. There's a lot of like really, really bright sunlight here at the top of this image. And naturally, I think it would catch the top of some of these structures here. Another thing it does is to just add some layer of separation between your foreground, midground, and background. So right now, before adding this in, it just feels like everything's sort of blended in together and there's no real separation between like what is behind and what is in front, and these like overlaps, which I think really helps sell depth in your image. All right, next, what I did was just make this a little bit darker and more yellow. I think if this is to be, again, your secondary focal point, then I think that just adding a little bit of that color back in, and also darkening it up to increase that contrast, makes me want to look there a bit more, because it's quite desaturated before, whereas you have a lot of saturation in like areas that really don't need it, right? All your corners are like super desaturated, super high detail, and it's kind of making me want to look there, versus like your middle, which is, you know, kind of dull and pale. But if I add that saturation in there, then now my eye is like, oh, okay, this is a good place to look. I should look here. All right, lastly, again, I said I would bring it back, that like magical glow. Instead of adding a really harsh like sunlight, like someone's shining a flashlight in your eye, I just added in this nice, big, warm glow. It's what people mean when they say bathe in sunlight. Just this overall nice glow that just, you know, suffuses the entire image versus this tiny, just like... So that's what I did. A little bit of glow to the sky, and also just a little bit of just light down here where the steps are, because, you know, these spirit, familiar, dear things also emit light, so that should be casting some light on these stairs. And it also gives an additional benefit of being a leading line and drawing your eye even more into the you know, story of the image. You know, you already have this stairs here, which is great. Again, leading line, clear focal point, I like that. We just want to add a little bit more to that and make sure that it really catches our attention and pulls our eye into the center of the image where we want people to look. All right, that's it. That's the final change. Here's the before and here's a look at the after. Thank you all for participating in this first round of, I don't know what I want to call it. Maybe we'll think of a catchy name. But thank you all for being so nice and participating and opening yourself up to feedback and criticism. This is great. I really think that we have such a talented community. Look at all this art. It's amazing. Like even the first like before images are all great. So this is nice. This is nice. Bye. I just got an email from Wizards of the Coast for a commission for art for Magic the Gathering. So this is very exciting. I started to work on, well, what does the character actually look like? So these sketches go into a little bit more detail. They're still not really finished,